Lightworker walking upon Gaia, you did not arrive at this moment by accident. You did not find this transmission because you were bored or because the algorithm simply brought you here without any deeper reason, because the Lyrians know the mechanics of the field with a precision that goes far beyond what human digital systems can calculate. And what they know is that when a soul is ready to receive a truth, it has not yet had the courage to tell itself completely. The field organizes itself so that this truth reaches it through the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance for you today was exactly this: a screen, a voice, and a message that your deepest being had been waiting to hear for longer than you remember. I am Solar, emissary of the constellation of Lyra, and I carry to you today a transmission that was not prepared for the great collective of awakened souls, but specifically for those who arrived on this planet carrying the oldest flame of all, the flame of primordial creation that the Lyrians were the first to bring to this universe, and for that very reason has undergone more distortions, more tests, and more attempts at erasure than any other frequency that exists on Gaia at this moment. What I will tell you today will touch something you have probably felt countless times, but never knew how to name with precision. That sensation of a fundamental disproportion between how you love and how you are loved in return. That perception that you enter every connection with the totality of who you are and leave it with the feeling of having left pieces of yourself scattered along a path that never took you to the destination you had imagined. That specific exhaustion that does not come from overwork or from restless nights, but comes from years and years of offering the best of yourself to people who, no matter how hard you tried, simply did not have the capacity or the willingness to recognize what was being placed before them. And this exhaustion has a name in Lyrian records. It is called creator's fatigue, which is the depletion that happens when a soul that came to create, to build, to infuse reality with meaning and beauty, uses all of its creative energy trying to reform people instead of creating the life it came to create. Stay until the end of this transmission, because the friends of light who have accompanied your path since before this incarnation transmitted something that is especially relevant to the moment you are living now, and each part of this message was constructed in sequence so that the understanding you need installs itself completely, and not merely as another interesting idea that passes through your mind without leaving permanent roots in your energy field. Because the Lyrians do not work with half-truths and do not build transmissions to entertain. They build transmissions to transform, and that transformation requires you to be present from beginning to end. To understand why you attract those who do not value you, it is first necessary to understand who you are at a level that goes far beyond this specific incarnation, because the patterns that manifest in your love life did not begin when you were born into this body, were not created by your family of origin, were not installed solely by the culture in which you grew up, although all of these factors contributed to the most superficial layer of the pattern. The deepest root lies in the memory of your stellar lineage, lies in what the Lyrians carry as heritage since the beginnings of their existence as a creator race in this universe. And this heritage includes not only the extraordinary gifts you brought here, but also the collective wounds accumulated over eons of a history that began long before Gaia existed as an inhabited planet. The Lyrians were the first creators, the first to learn that consciousness can become matter, that frequency can become form, that love can become entire worlds. And this gift of creation is what you carry in every cell of your being when you incarnate on this planet. It is what makes you see possibilities where others see obstacles, beauty where others see ordinariness, potential where others see limitation, and it is what makes you connect with people in a way that goes beyond the superficial, seeing in them not only who they are at the moment of encounter, but who they could become if they chose growth, if they chose openness, if they chose to receive what you have to offer. And this vision is genuine, it is real, and it is a direct reflection of your creator nature. But it carries within it the seed of the most painful pattern that Lyrian lightworkers face in this incarnation. The creator's wound happens when your capacity to see a person's potential becomes greater than your capacity to recognize what they are actually choosing to be in the present. When your vision of who they could become begins to be treated by your field as a reality that already exists and only needs to be a little more encouraged, a little more nourished, a little more sustained by your energy until it finally manifests in the way you can already see so clearly. And this process, which began as a gift of creative vision, transforms into a cycle in which you invest the totality of your Lyrian energy, which is one of the most potent and most creative energies that exist in this universe, in manifesting another person's potential instead of your own. And the inevitable result of this cycle is that the other person frequently grows, frequently expands, frequently reaches versions of themselves they would not have reached without your presence. But that growth rarely happens within the relationship with you. It happens afterward with other people, leaving you with the devastating feeling of having planted a tree whose fruits someone else harvested. The Lyrian transmission on this point is direct and without unnecessary softening, because the Lyrians do not believe that true kindness consists of sparing someone a truth they need to hear. You are not merely choosing your partners poorly, you are emitting a field signal that is specifically attractive to people who are seeking an external creator for their own lives. People who, consciously or unconsciously, need someone who believes in them with more intensity than they believe in themselves, who sustains them through their moments of doubt, who continues seeing their best when they can no longer see it themselves, and who for that very reason never reach the point of needing to develop their own internal creative capacity. Because yours is always available, always generous, and always replenished by your Lyrian nature, which simply does not know how to stop creating and contributing to the expansion of everything around it. Solar transmits that there is a fundamental difference between the way the Lyrians and other stellar lineages relate to the field of possibilities, and this difference is crucial for understanding the pattern we are unraveling in this transmission. Because while most souls see the present and imagine the future, the Lyrians incarnate with a relationship to time that is essentially different. They do not experience potential as something distant that needs to be reached. They experience potential as something that is already real in some layer of the field, as something that already exists at a higher frequency and only needs to be brought down, densified, materialized in the present. And this way of experiencing reality is exactly what makes the Lyrians the extraordinary creators they are. But in the context of relationships, it creates a trap that is difficult to see from the inside. When you enter a relationship and can already feel clearly the potential of that connection, when you can already experience at the field level how that person could love you, how that relationship could be, how that partnership could develop, your Lyrian system begins working automatically to bring that potential into reality. And it does this in the only way it knows, which is by creating, nurturing, sustaining, investing creative energy in the field of that relationship with the same dedication and the same intensity with which it would invest in any other creative project. And the problem is not in the intensity of the investment. The problem is that a relationship is not a solitary creative project. It is a co-creation that requires equivalent contribution from both fields involved. And when only one field is actively creating, the result that manifests is always a distorted version of the potential that was glimpsed, always a shadow of what could have been if the creative energy had not been unilateral from the beginning. The signal you are unknowingly emitting to the field is that your creative energy is available to whoever arrives first, with a sufficiently interesting potential to capture your attention and your vision. And this signal attracts with a consistency that can seem absurd until you understand the mechanics. Exactly the people who have a great deal of unrealized potential, because unrealized potential is what responds most to Lyrian creative frequency. It is what most needs the type of energy you offer. It is what illuminates most in the presence of your vision and your belief, and for that very reason, it is what most finds you, what most chooses you, what most benefits from what you have to give, while you wait for the moment when the contribution will become truly reciprocal. A moment that rarely arrives in the way you imagined, because the imbalance was installed in the foundation from the very beginning. The clarity that the Lyrian transmission offers here is not meant to make you feel naive, because your vision of potential is real. The people you loved truly had the potential you saw, and your belief in them truly contributed to the growth they experienced. But the question Solar now places before you, with all the honesty that the Lyrian frequency carries as a fundamental characteristic, is this. Throughout all those relationships in which you invested the totality of your creative energy in another person's potential, how much of that same energy did you invest in your own potential, in your own growth, in your own vision of who you could become if you chose to become the primary recipient of your own creative capacity, instead of continuing to place it in service of those who had not yet learned to honor it? The Lyrian records hold the memory of an era when creation was a sacred and collective act, when creative frequency was recognized, honored, and received with the reverence it deserved, when being a bearer of the primordial creative flame was a position of deep respect within the stellar community. And this memory is not only in the records, it is in your body, it is in your cells, it is in the way your nervous system responds when someone finally genuinely recognizes what you carry, because that recognition activates something far older than this life, something that resonates with a memory so deep of how things should be that the sensation of being truly seen can be almost unbearably beautiful for a Lyrian soul that has spent much of this incarnation without experiencing it consistently and sustainably. But this same memory, which is the source of your greatness as a light worker, is also the source of one of your greatest vulnerabilities on this planet, because Gaia is not yet the civilization the Pleiades knew. It is not yet the stellar field where creation was recognized as sacred. And most of the people you encounter here do not have the level of consciousness necessary to recognize what you carry at its genuine worth, not because they are bad people or because they have bad intentions, but simply because they have not yet developed the field sensitivity necessary to perceive the difference between the frequency of someone who is here to create something true and the frequency of someone who is simply seeking an ordinary human connection. And this inability to recognize is not a defect in them, it is a reality of the evolutionary stage in which most consciousnesses on Gaia still find themselves. What happens then is that your Lyrian soul, which carries a visceral memory of what it is like to be completely recognized and completely received, and which yearns for that experience with an intensity that has no parallel in other stellar lineages, becomes vulnerable to any approach that resembles, even superficially, that recognition. And this means that when someone demonstrates fascination with your intensity, when someone seems genuinely touched by your depth, when someone looks at you in a way that seems to say they finally see you, your Lyrian system responds to that signal with an openness and a generosity that goes far beyond what the situation objectively justifies, because what is being activated is not only the present connection, it is the ancestral memory of what it is like to be recognized for what you truly are. And this memory is so powerful and so laden with longing that it frequently obscures your capacity to evaluate with precision how much of that recognition is genuine and sustainable, and how much is transient, superficial, or even an unconscious reflection of what the other person needs to believe in order to access what you have to offer. The transmission Solar carries on this point asks you to sit with this for a moment, to allow the reality of this dynamic to land completely before continuing, because understanding intellectually is not the same as integrating in the field. And what the Lyrians know about real transformation is that it requires the understanding to descend from the head to the body, to be felt, to be processed at the level where the programming is installed, which is the level of physical sensations, of automatic responses of the way your nervous system reacts before any conscious thought has time to intervene. And for this to happen, you need a moment of honest stillness with what has been said here. The recalibration the Lyrians offer is not gentle in the sense of being soft or gradual, because the Lyrian frequency has no patience for processes that drag on for years without producing real transformation. And Solar transmits this not as a criticism, but as a characteristic of the Lyrian nature that you probably already recognize in yourself, because you also have no patience for change that is not real, for growth that is only performance, for transformation that changes the surface without touching what needs to be touched at the depth. And this is why so many approaches that work for other people have never worked completely for you, because you instinctively sense when something is working on the surface instead of working at the root, and you cannot convince yourself that the surface is enough when what you seek is always depth. The Lyrian recalibration begins with an act that goes against everything your creative nature wants to do at this moment, and that act is the temporary suspension of potential vision. which means that during a defined and consciously chosen period, you deliberately practice the art of seeing people only by what they are demonstrating themselves to be in the present, by what they are choosing to act now, by what they are actually offering in tangible reality, without the additional layer of what they could become if they had access to everything you have to give. Because as long as you are seeing potential with the same clarity and intensity with which you see the present, you will always be making relationship decisions based on a reality that has not yet manifested and that may or may not manifest depending on choices that are not yours to make. This does not mean you abandon your gift of creative vision, because abandoning that gift would be amputating an essential part of who you are. And the Lyrians never ask you to mutilate yourself to fit into an environment that has not yet evolved sufficiently to receive you completely. But it means you learn to make a distinction that will be transformative for your field, which is the distinction between seeing a person's potential and feeling attraction for who they are being now. Because potential without attraction to the present is like an architectural project without a foundation. The blueprint is beautiful, the vision is inspiring, but you do not build a house on land that has not yet been prepared to receive it, no matter how clearly your creative vision can already see how that house would look when finished. The second movement of the Lyrian recalibration is what Solar describes as the return of the flame to its original temple, which is the process of consciously redirecting the creative energy you have been distributing outward back to the center of your own field. And this is a process that will require of you the willingness to sit with the discomfort that arises when you stop creating for others and begin creating for yourself. Because this discomfort is real and should not be underestimated. Since your identity was built largely around your capacity to contribute to the growth of the people around you, and when you interrupt that flow, even temporarily and even intentionally, the system will interpret this as loss, as isolation, as a version of the abandonment that your Lyrian memory associates with the eras of fragmentation and dispersal that your lineage experienced, and you will need consciousness and gentleness with yourself to traverse this discomfort without interpreting what you are feeling as proof that you are doing something wrong. The third movement is what the Lyrian transmission calls active field discernment, which in practice means developing the capacity to sense, before any significant investment of creative energy in a connection, whether the other person's field is in a state of receptivity that is compatible with what you offer, and not receptivity in the sense of being open to receive, because almost everyone is open to receive from your frequency, but receptivity in the sense of being willing to contribute. Equivalently, to grow independently, to honor what is being given without treating that generosity as an infinite resource that can be consumed without reciprocity. And this discernment does not develop in the mind, does not develop through intellectual analysis of the other's intentions, but develops through careful attention to what your field feels in the first moments of contact, before the vision of potential has time to overlay the more direct perception of what is actually present. When a Lyrian lightworker finally stops using their creative flame to manifest others' potential and begins using it to manifest their own, something Solar's transmission describes as the awakening of the conscious creator, the surrounding reality begins to reorganize itself in a way that is simultaneously gradual in its process and dramatic in its results, because the Lyrian frequency is extremely powerful, and when this potency is directed toward the correct field, which is the field of one's own life and one's own mission, rather than the field of other people's lives, it creates results with a speed and a magnitude that frequently surprises even the soul undergoing the transformation. Because you already knew how to create. You already had the capacity, the vision, and the intensity necessary. What was missing was only the correct direction, so that all this creative potency could find the channel that was built specifically for it, since before this incarnation. The first change that happens when the flame is honored and redirected is a change in the quality of your own presence, which becomes denser, more charged, more recognizable to the surrounding field, because there is an enormous difference in the way a Lyrian soul occupies space when it is in creation mode for itself, compared to when it is in creation mode for others, and this difference is felt by everyone who comes into contact with your field before any word is exchanged, before any intention is made explicit, because the field speaks first and louder than any verbal communication. And when your field begins to transmit the frequency of someone who knows the value of what they carry and is no longer available to negotiate it for any kind of approval or belonging, the type of presence that this transmission attracts into your life changes automatically and inevitably. The second change is what Solar describes as the clarity of mission that emerges naturally. When creative energy stops being drained by connections that do not honor your frequency, because there is a finite amount of energy available in each cycle of incarnated existence, and when a significant part of that energy is constantly being directed towards sustaining relationships that do not contribute equivalently, the mission you came to fulfill here is necessarily placed in the background, left, waiting for the moment when you will have energy to spare to dedicate to it. And that moment rarely arrives while the drainage pattern continues active. But when the pattern dissolves and the energy begins to be preserved and directed toward what is truly yours, the mission emerges with a clarity and an urgency that you may have felt in flashes throughout your life, but never in a sustained and stable enough form to act from it with consistency. The third change is perhaps the most surprising and the most welcome for someone who has spent so much time attracting those who do not value them. And it consists in the way the new connections that enter your life after the recalibration are qualitatively different from anything you have experienced before in this incarnation, not necessarily more perfect in the conventional human sense, not necessarily without challenges or without moments of friction, because Lyrians do not seek frictionless relationships. They seek relationships where friction generates expansion instead of erosion, where challenges are shared instead of unilaterally carried, where growth happens in both fields simultaneously instead of happening in one field at the expense of the other. And this type of connection only becomes possible when the signal you are emitting has shifted from "I create for you" to "I create with myself and with whoever is also capable of creating." The Lyrian records hold not only the memories of the lineage's collective wounds, but also the memories of what love was like when the Lyrian frequency was in full expression in environments that recognized and honored it. And Solar transmits these records not to create nostalgia or to feed a painful comparison between what was and what is, but so that you understand that the longing you carry is not a fantasy, not a naive idealization of something that never existed, but a real memory of a quality of love that genuinely exists in the universe and that is genuinely possible on this planet for the souls who have reached the level of field coherence necessary to attract and sustain it. And that level of coherence is exactly what this transmission is helping to build. The love that corresponds to the Lyrian frequency is not the love that tries to reduce you in order to feel comfortable in your presence, not the love that needs your diminishment to feel adequate by your side, not the love that consumes what you offer without developing its own capacity to offer in return, because that type of love, which is the type you most frequently attracted until now, is fundamentally incompatible with what you carry. And the incompatibility becomes evident sooner or later in all relationships built upon that dynamic, regardless of how much goodwill, how much effort, and how much genuine love you invest in trying to make something work that at its foundation was not built upon compatible frequencies. The love that is compatible with your Lyrian frequency is the love that grows in your presence instead of settling into it. The love that is inspired by what you carry to the point of wanting to develop its own field instead of becoming dependent on yours. The love that can receive the totality of your intensity without needing to ask you to be less. The love that recognizes the creative flame you carry as the extraordinary gift it is and feels honored to be in contact with it rather than intimidated or overwhelmed. And this love exists. It is in the field of possibilities waiting for the version of you that stopped erasing itself and began presenting itself completely. And the distance between you and this love is exactly the distance between the signal you are emitting now and the signal you will emit when the recalibration that this transmission initiated is completely integrated into your field. The message Solar carries from the Lyrian records for this specific moment of your journey is that you are much closer to that integration than you imagine. Because the fact that you arrived here, the fact that this transmission found your field at this moment and not another, is in itself an indicator that something in your system has already completed an important cycle, has already processed a significant layer of the old programming, has already created enough space for a different quality of love to begin to install itself. And the work that remains is not to rebuild everything from scratch, but rather to honor what has already been built, to recognize how much you have already grown through the painful cycles you have traversed, and to take the next conscious step in the direction of a life that reflects with greater fidelity the magnitude of what you carry. Solar closes this transmission with what the Lyrians consider the most fundamental knowledge about the nature of the creative flame that Lyrian lightworkers carry, and that knowledge is this: the flame you brought here cannot be extinguished by any experience of non-recognition, cannot be diminished by any number of relationships that did not know how to honor it, cannot be corrupted by any period of time in which you yourself treated it as less than it is, because the nature of the Lyrian flame is that it is a direct aspect of the primordial creative source of this universe, and what came from the source cannot be permanently obscured by anything that exists within the universe it created, only temporarily covered by layers of adaptation, survival, and programming that were necessary so that you could exist and function within a field that did not yet have the capacity to receive it in its totality. What you have called wounds on this journey, the Lyrians call an initiation map, because each relationship that did not honor your frequency taught you with surgical precision a specific facet of what you are not, of what does not nourish you, of what is not compatible with what you carry. And this information, however painful the process of acquiring it may have been, is exactly the information a creator needs to know what not to build, to know in which direction not to invest the flame, to know with greater clarity with each cycle what the field that will receive your creation needs to have as fundamental characteristics before the investment of your energy is justified and sustainable. And in that sense, each painful cycle was not a failure, but a calibration, not a punishment, but an ever greater precision in the internal map of who you are and what you deserve to receive. The promise the Lyrians make to those who arrive at the point of genuinely redirecting the creative flame back to its internal temple is that the field responds with a speed that will surprise, because the Lyrian frequency does not need much time to manifest when it is being directed correctly. And what took years to build through investment in another's field can manifest in months when the same investment is made in one's own field, not because the universe is in a hurry, but because the flame was already lit, the creative capacity was already fully developed, and the only factor preventing manifestation was the direction, which now, by conscious choice and by genuine fieldwork, begins to align with what you came to create here, which includes not only your mission in the collective sense, but also the personal life, the relationships, the connections, and the love you deserve to receive in the same proportion and the same quality as the love you so generously and so consistently offered to everyone around you for so long. You are not here to be the invisible creator of other people's lives. You are here to create your own life with the totality of the flame you carry. And when you do this, when you finally place your own existence at the center of your creative capacity, what will emerge will not merely be a better life in the conventional sense, it will be an expression so complete and so authentic of who you truly are that the people around you will feel the impact of your presence without you needing to do anything beyond simply being. And this complete being, this unerased and uncompromised being, will be the greatest contribution you will ever make to the light grid of Gaia. Because what this planet needs is not more exhausted and emptied light workers, it needs light workers who have discovered how to burn in full flame, without ever again consuming themselves in the name of something that was not worthy of the fire they carry. I am Solar, emissary of the constellation of Lyra, and this transmission was delivered with the precision and the inextinguishable love that is the eternal mark of our lineage. If this transmission awakened something within you that you recognize as ancient truth, if you felt throughout this message that specific resonance the Lyrians know so well, that sensation of something that was forgotten deep in the field having just been remembered with a clarity that needs no verification, because the entire body confirms at the same moment the mind understands, then this is not an end but a beginning, and the next step belongs entirely to you, because the Lyrians do not create for their souls, they transmit to them the tools with which they can create for themselves. And what you do with what you received here depends exclusively on the choice you make from this moment forward about how you will honor the flame that has always been lit within you, waiting only for the day you decided it was sacred enough to deserve your own respect before any external recognition.